Computer.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
Yep, fine.
Yeah. So, just like in the email, can you first explain uh, what has been changed since you published your article about early interventions in 2014 in New Zealand?
I would say that the same structural problems remain.
Okay.
And these problems were evident at the outset of the early intervention change in 2000. I should probably send you a copy of a chapter I wrote called Learning Differences in New Zealand.
Okay. We can do that later. Yep.
Yeah, I'll just make a note.
Learning differences.
Yeah, it's a chapter in the book about international education of children with different disabilities.
Okay.
Anyway, I think there were a number of problems that were set up by the way early intervention was changed in act called Special Education 2000. And Special Education 2000 replaced the Education Act of 1989. So during the 1990s, early intervention was mostly a local initiative started by families or dedicated professionals. It wasn't really a formal part of the New Zealand education system or the New Zealand health system.
Okay.
And so in 2000, well, for starting about 1996, they started planning for early intervention and special education to become a more formalized part of education in New Zealand. And that produced the Special Education Act of 2000, which probably you and your supervisors have read. Could you tell me who's your PhD supervisor?
She's Dr. Ali Glasgow.
Allie, what's her last name?
Glasgow.
Okay.
She mainly works in, she mainly research on early childhood education, but she's been teaching students with disabilities in the early childhood system.
Okay. So the original plan was to have this seamless education system from the point that the child was, or the young child was diagnosed with the disability, into early intervention, and then into the state schooling system with supports. And the early childhood curriculum, Tifariki,
Yep.
was actually pretty ideal for this. It's a much better model than most other early childhood curriculums in the world, in my opinion, for being able to include children with disabilities and for having the focus on the individual learning progression of each child. And I don't know what the early childhood curriculum is in Indonesia, but in many other English-speaking countries, the early childhood curriculum is really focused on activities that are central or thought to be central to the development of subjects taught in schools. So there might be alphabet training, counting, sorting, naming colors, all those kinds of things. And that kind of curriculum is not as suitable for most children with disabilities as compared to Tifariki.
Okay.
So I think Tifariki was one of the big strengths that New Zealand had when it started setting up its early intervention program.
Okay.
So one of the problems that came out that was evident by 2014 is that children who had Tifariki in the preschool, normal children without disabilities, as well as children with disabilities, usually when they got to school, there was a very abrupt transition to learning school subjects, right? So a lot of 5-year-olds, I did a lot of research about 5-year-olds, and a lot of 5-year-olds, whether they had disabilities or not, started struggling because it was so completely different from their experiences in early childhood. And now they started extending Tifariki concepts up to age 8. So now many state schools have play-based learning for the first couple of years of primary school to help ease this transition. But they didn't have that in 24, well, when I was writing that article in 2012. So one thing that happened is when children with disabilities got to school, they were really not ready for school experiences. The other thing that happened is early on, we made submissions to have the early intervention program linked with medical care through the health system. And this didn't work out very well, and it's still a problem. Right now, if a child is currently, it's better than it used to be, but not much. Currently, if a child is identified before birth or at birth or in the first, say, 2 years, early intervention is a result of programs set up through the Ministry of Health. Then they transition into programs set up by the Ministry of Education. There are no joint programs that I'm aware of. So that means that children usually with the most severe disabilities who are diagnosed in the first couple years get early intervention through a medical model, which is focused, say, on physical rehabilitation or physiotherapy, feeding and swallowing programs, and perhaps speech and language development. But mainly physiotherapy and swallowing, eating, that kind of intervention. Not really any cognitive-based intervention. For children who are diagnosed from, say, age 2 or so on, say children with more severe forms of autism, those go into early intervention programs run through the Ministry of Education, typically. And then children with other problems like severe emotional disturbance, they all go into education programs as well. So you have this disconnect between, say, the programs focusing on physical disabilities or the physical consequences of different disabilities, and then an educational model through the Ministry of Education. So it's very, very difficult to have an integrated model in which both, the physical medical issues, say about seizure control and swallowing and, digestion, bowel troubles, and so forth, are integrated with social and cognitive development. And this continues. This has been a problem from the start. I think one of the reasons we had I don't know if you know, but we had an early intervention training program at Canterbury for a while that I started that was in the health sciences department. And I had managed to get people from both the medical and educational systems together to run this program so that students got training in both the educational model and the medical model. But overall, it's very difficult to do that. And one of the outstanding problems is that many of the GPs, general practitioners, and pediatric specialists do not believe in early intervention as having any positive impact. They believe that early intervention, what I was told for years, early intervention raises false expectations in parents. Early intervention is like palliative care because in reality, nothing can really be done. So even at the beginning for babies born with, say, Down syndrome, to have heart surgery was very unusual. Now with the disability rights, of course, those eras are past. Have you heard of conductive education?
Not yet.
Okay, so conductive education is a program that started as I recall, at the Peto Institute in Czechoslovakia. It was behind the Iron Curtain for many years.
Okay.
And it was aimed at children with cerebral palsy, and especially children with very severe cerebral palsy, quadriplegic, which is the one that affects all four limbs.
All four limbs, yep.
An interesting, most children with cerebral palsy are not affected cognitively, although they can be given lots of drugs, which actually affect them.
Yeah.
But many children with cerebral palsy have, a normal cognitive ability. It was a very unusual group. And so after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, conductive education spread to the West, including New Zealand. And it still has a very innovative approach to young children. And it involved, at the Peto Institute, the children received basically 12 hours a day of intervention. And so those children learned to walk, and they learned to, they were toilet trained. So this model of early intervention came to New Zealand in the early 1990s and was completely different from the charity-based early intervention programs previously. And it was a combination of the medical model and the education model in a way. And this started changing people's perception of what early intervention could be. But it was very, very confrontational for doctors, medical personnel, to accept that children with cerebral palsy could learn to walk and not be in a wheelchair for their life. And I think in New Zealand, this kind of hardened the resolve against early intervention. I think a lot of it was professional jealousy or racism. I'm not sure all the reasons why. So eventually in New Zealand, because the medical people really didn't believe that anything could really be improved for people with disabilities, and because young children were still being institutionalized, and parents were being told that their child's or their baby's life would be hopeless, the education people, I think, decided to just go their own way, because there was the law saying that all children should go to school. And so to this day, there is a big disconnect between what happens to support the children medically, physically, and in their physical health, and what happens to them educationally. So, for example, there's quite a, you have to get, if your child needs physiotherapy, you have to get that through the Ministry of Health. But if the child needs to learn to talk, you might get that through the Ministry of Education.
Okay.
And so parents have to do all this work negotiating separate services for their child. And I think this means that educated parents and parents who know how to work the system have a big advantage over parents who don't have those benefits.
Okay.
And that is still the way it is today.
All right. So back into the medical profession, like attitude towards the children with disabilities, do you think that they said that based on the research or findings that they're doing, or is just based on the hunts, or just simply because they don't feel like it? What do you think
Well,
might be the cause of that?
I think those are good questions. And I'm not sure what it would be like in your country. And if you have contact with your academic colleagues in your where you did your previous studies, maybe a master's student could do a survey of some medical professionals and find out what their attitudes are. I think it would be very valuable, because Western attitudes, are based on this long history of the separation of the mind and the body. And I'm not sure that in non-Western countries you would find the same attitudes. There's also a lot of buried Christian beliefs in the doctors' attitudes that come from centuries of belief about that. I once had a student in the U.S. Interview different leaders of various religions, and many of them felt that children with disabilities would never have an afterlife or be reborn or go to heaven or whatever. So they saw them as less than human. And I think these attitudes are very linked to culture. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
We had I really can't say why they did it. I did find out that in New Zealand medical schools, which is basically 5 years of training plus several years afterwards of practical placement things, they might have a total of 30 minutes on children with disabilities.
All right.
So they're not properly trained. And I don't know how to explain it. It's more of like a mechanical problem, right? So
Okay.
if
Yeah.
you have a baby like this, it's going to need these medical treatments. It's not about what intervention or education could make a difference. That's not part of their medical training.
Okay.
Um,
And okay. And do you think that all, regardless of their cultural background of the medical professional, do you think that the uh, Maori doctors held the same belief, or did they have a different belief from the attitude of students with disabilities regarding the development and etc.? Have you ever communicate or had a discussion with someone who is Maori and who's also a medical professional?
Yes, I used to teach a lot about the bicultural model and the Maori model. Now, the Maori model is different from the bicultural model, right?
Oh, okay.
So, Rangatiratanga is the Maori more central belief. The bicultural model is attempting to put the Pakeha model together with the Maori model,
Right.
right? And then there's the Western model, right? Okay.
Yep.
And in traditional Maori culture, as I have been educated to understand it, it was very inclusive.
Cool.
So everyone was part of a whānau, and the whānau, as you probably know by now, was this extended family where everyone helped raise the children. So when deinstitutionalization happened in Northland, for example, in the 90s, the first kinds of things they started teaching or working with these Maori people with intellectual disability, primarily, who had been in institutions for people with severe intellectual disability. They started teaching them waiata songs. They started teaching them haka movements. They started giving them Maori food and talking to them in te reo. So it was all about the culture. The Maori culture was out of balance. Are you familiar with Mason Dury's model of Maori health?
No, Mason.
Yeah, Mason.
Okay.
Durie.
Durie. Okay, Mason Dairy model.
Okay,
what?
so this model has 5 pillars of health.
Okay. Oh, okay. I think you mentioned that in your article.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yep.
the Maori model is basically that a disability, that's not a Maori word, right?
All right.
But an
Yeah.
imbalance occurs if one of these 5 areas is out of whack.
Okay.
So one of them is whenua, which is the family. Another connection to, whānau, and then whenua, which is connection to your birthland. And then there's hinengaro, your health, and so on. So they believe that these people had been, quote, disabled because they had been put in institutions, so they were away from their family and away from their culture.
All right.
So this is what contributed to their disability.
All right.
So it's a completely different model. Different model. And if you followed that model, you would come up with a completely different intervention system.
I see. All right. And you said that when a family has a child with disabilities, they have to navigate to the service from the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. Isn't there any agency or units that kind of putting on the resources in the first place, and then when families came, they can direct that you can do this, you can go to this resources or clinic or school? Is there any agency that like coordinate the whole things for the early interventions?
There is in Christchurch, there is in Auckland, and I believe there might be a committee in Wellington. I'm not sure.
Okay.
However, it's very political.
All right.
And here's one of the reasons it's political. It goes back to a mistake that was made when special education was formed. So when there, do you know the difference between incidence and prevalence?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're going to start a program and you need government funding, right? You have to plan for how many children with disabilities there's going to be.
Yep.
Okay, so there's two ways to do this, basically. One way is you could actually do a survey and count how many children with disabilities there are, or you could do a statistical sample of your population. And you could also check birth records for the more severe disabilities that are evident at birth, right? So
Yep.
you could do that. Or you could just look at statistics from around the world and say, oh, there's going to be 1% of kids like this.
Yep.
Right? So New Zealand decided to base their service delivery on statistical averages from other countries.
I see. All right. That's a problem.
Yes, that was a very big problem from the
Yep.
beginning. In fact, when they had a review of special education, I wrote this huge submission. I don't think I sent that one to you, about how New Zealand's population had grown by more than 1 million, but they hadn't updated their number. So they estimated New Zealand's population was 4.1 million at the time.
Okay.
And so they said, we're going to serve 7,000 children, the end. So, and of course, immediately they had 7,000 children, because we had areas of the country with many more kids with disabilities than would be predicted by a statistical average.
Yep.
And especially on the South Island and in Northland, there were 3 particular areas with lots of preterm births due to inadequate maternal pre-pregnancy care and other issues.
Yep.
And so even after 5 or 6 years and the population had grown, or 10 years, the population had grown, they hadn't changed their funding model to fund a certain number of children. That meant parents had to fight. Some parents said to me, I have to wait for someone to die before my child can even get on the waiting list.
Gosh, that's really shameful.
Yes. So I wrote this huge thing to them, submission, I should say, saying their statistical model was flawed. And of course, they didn't want to do a prevalence study or an incidence study of their own, because it would have turned up all these anomalies in these different districts, with way more kids with cerebral palsy in one part of New Zealand, way more kids with learning development problems from preterm birth in another part of New Zealand, and anyway, way more kids with horrible behavior problems in another part of the country.
Yeah.
So that's very political, right?
Yep.
And I said they at least had to increase their estimates based on the new statistics that were coming out in the world literature on incidence and prevalence. And they had to also acknowledge that New Zealand population has increased, right? So they increased their limit to like 8,000 or something. It's ridiculous. So what happens when you have a local committee like we have in Christchurch, and a new child is identified with cerebral palsy? Well, there's not enough places for kids with cerebral palsy in the first couple years to go to. And also those places, there's 2 in Christchurch, basically. If one gets one child, that center gets more funding than the other center. So they have to put one child there, and then the next child the next place, regardless of what is better for the child.
Okay.
The funding model going.
All right.
And then also we have doctors telling people, well, it's not really cerebral palsy. What you're seeing will just go away. So they're just delay the diagnosis because they know there's no room in the 2 centers. So you know, once you start with a bad model for how many children are going to get services, and it's so rigid, it can't take into account changes in what happens. Um, like they, even though it was showing in the States, they never figured that the increase in children with autism was going to show up in New Zealand. So they, so if you don't have a panel, an independent scientific panel that keeps track of trends in disability and things that are happening that are changing the rates of disability in the world. So now it's 1 in 4, right?
Yep.
By the time people are adults. Uh, so, and back then it was 1 in, I don't know, 7 or something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they can't have, the system is flawed and political. And I struggle to see how it wouldn't be. Once you set it up that there's an absolute limit, that's a big problem.
Oh yeah.
The other problem that they still have is the education model. The medical model for the first couple years is kind of a mix of center-based services and individual services delivered in a health center context, right? So like there'll be a swallowing clinic.
Okay.
Or there'll be like conductive education for children with cerebral palsy. But most of the rest of the education-based early intervention is either support the child, support the early childhood teacher, and have the child attend early childhood service, or provide home-based training, which turns parents into teachers. Now, that is not a Maori, usually a Maori acceptable model.
Okay.
That's a Western idea. It started about 35 or 40 years ago, I guess, where parents are teachers. And most parents, they see themselves as parents, not as teachers. And that it's a struggle to think that you're going to deliver instructions and then consequate your child like a teacher might
Yes.
in your home.
Yep.
So most people would rather give their children hugs than deliver consequences that they've been trained to do.
Yeah. Yes.
So there's
Certainly
a
it is.
tension there. The other thing is there is a division of services. So if you deliver early intervention in the home, then the professional has to travel to the parent's home. And in New Zealand, as you probably know, how long have you been in New Zealand?
3 months.
3 months.
Yes.
All right, not very long. It's traveling around New Zealand is difficult because a lot of communities are remote.
Certainly, if you talk about to regional area, I think it's difficult. Yeah.
So a lot of money is spent on petrol and
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah.
Is that the best use of the money?
No, I believe no. No,
Probably
I'm not
not.
sure. Yeah.
And also, then the parents can't work and so they might have to have. What do they do? You know, other parents can put their child in a center and go to work.
Yep.
Our parents of children with disabilities, because there's so few specialized center-based services, it's very difficult for parents and families to have that same kind of experience and contribute financially to their families.
Yeah.
So I think that is another thing. Another problem in New Zealand is there's a limit on the number of people, the children that can access early intervention, and there's a budget limitation. So then they decide how much money they can spend per child.
Okay.
And if your child, when you go into early intervention, the first thing they do is give assessments. And the assessments can involve driving to the child's home and doing the assessment.
Yeah.
Right. So I have heard unofficially that 2/3 of the money for a child is spent on assessment and travel.
Okay.
That leaves 1/3 for intervention.
Yep. And how they base out the limit for each child? Like, do they conduct the survey, or it just like the average? They do it based on the average things.
No, there's a scheme for the older children,
Oh,
school-age
okay.
children, called the Ongoing Resourcing Scheme. Have you heard of that?
Yep. Yep. Oh, so they do that ongoing
No, but they
resources.
do something like that.
Oh,
So they
okay.
have bands after the assessment, which is basically a developmental and behavioral assessment.
Yep.
They could be, quite high needs or kind of quite low needs. So, or a waiting list. Now you'll hear that there's no waiting list. That's because they stopped having a waiting list.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean everybody was served. It just means there's no more waiting list.
Yes.
So you just have to keep reapplying all the time.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So I'm sorry. I'm probably a lot more cynical than your teachers. It's probably too
Okay.
cynical for someone who's only been here 3 months. Sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. It's really opened up my mind, and I hope that I can learn to have something to benefit from that. I hope that we don't have
Well, that's what
similar
I thought.
problem.
If your government wants you to help set up early intervention when you go back, you might as well learn all the problems and pitfalls.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
What was your background? I mean, where
Oh,
have you studied?
okay. I used to teach at special school. I trained as special education teacher
At
in
special
Indonesia.
education school? Sorry, I
Yep.
missed that.
Yeah, I was trained as a special education teacher, and I teach at a special education, public special education, public special school in Indonesia for around
In
3 years.
Jakarta or
No,
no?
Aceh. So I am in the most northern part, in the most western part of Indonesia, in Aceh, which is also a has a special district and special autonomy. One of the two provinces in Indonesia who have special autonomy in Indonesia, Aceh, Yogyakarta, and West Papua. And then I did my master in Monash University in special and inclusive education. And back home, when I graduate, I teach at inclusive private school, primary, for about 2 years, and then and then I moved to lecture in university, like 1.5 years ago, teaching in special education department in university.
And you're on a government scholarship now to Vic?
Yeah, the Indonesian government funded my PhD scholarship. And
Congratulations.
thank you. Okay, and you can send me all those lists, and I will surely inspect them. And I just want to, beside the bad things, do you think that any council cities or program that not ideal, but closer to the idealities that you've seen or you've heard during your during your professional career? Is there any in New Zealand? Any center,
I'll
any
think about
program?
that. I might
Okay.
send you a copy of the structure of the you have to also look at how you're going to train early intervention professionals.
Oh, okay.
So I had a program that was approved that was an interdisciplinary program in health sciences for early intervention that I thought worked really well. We trained about 7 or 8 people a year. Then New Zealand changed its teacher education training, and then they changed the special education training, and my program was eventually absorbed into theirs and then canceled because.
Okay.
But I think there's still elements of that program that you might be interested in seeing, in reading about, and I also I'm thinking of some people that I think would be good for you to meet or talk to and get their
Okay. Sure.
perspectives
Yep.
about early intervention instead of just mine.
Yep. Thank
And
you.
your
Thank you.
instructors as well.
Yeah. Yes. That's
So I'll
wonderful.
be emailing you those things. And
Okay.
also, I just want you to feel free to, set up another call or email me your questions.
Yeah.
Might be easier.
I want to say that, but thank you for mentioning that. I really want to talk to you again. I think I haven't read many things, and I haven't talked to many people yet, especially in the field, like the parents, who has this problem. So maybe as time goes by, I can acknowledging and having more insight beside just reading things from the literature. Yeah, and I really want to discuss a lot more with you in the future. Thank you for the encouragement there.
But before you go, what kind of research are you planning to do
Okay.
for your doctoral thesis?
So basically, my plan is to have to conduct a literature review about what is the early intervention model, because in Indonesia, what I learned as early intervention is the method of training the children early, not the system. Like we don't in Indonesia, we don't have the interdisciplinary teams or any programs like link between the education, the health, and social, and etc. So it's basically how we, as a special education teacher, teach the young people aged 3 to 5 years old about what can what they should do in the special school. Like, so that's the whole early interventions that I received back my undergraduate, back my teacher training studies. But when I read the literature, like early intervention itself is really a bunch of a whole of things that wholly different with how I know early intervention is in Indonesia. Like we have the system, we have the resources, we have the support, and etc. So I want to talk about this is what should be the ideal of early interventions throughout the literature review. And then I'm going to do a case study about how New Zealand, because I actually read your article back in 2020. So when I saw your article, New Zealand has has kind of this thing that I really want to look at how in terms of how early intervention works as a system and a comprehensive resources. So I want to conduct a case study here in New Zealand and look at how early interventions deliver to those communities. And then for another part of my study, I want to conduct how the supposed early interventions deliver in Aceh, in my province, and see what's been played out here in New Zealand and in Aceh. And then I'm going to
so that would be like a comparative analysis.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan, and my supervisors also encouraged me to do that. So he also she also tried to to encourage me to talk to the officials in the government, not just the families or the teacher or the early interventionist, but also in terms of the how the officials look at how the early intervention from the system perspective, from the government perspective. So yeah, I'm trying to also conducted an FGD to the executive in the Ministry of Education and Ministry or Department of Education, which in charge of the early intervention team. So that's still the plan, and I'm going to see how it plays out in the next 6 or 8 months.
Oh, that sounds very, very interesting, and should produce some insight that will be give you both the strengths and weaknesses or liabilities and challenges of the system that you're going to go back to and help to strengthen. So
yeah, I
that'll
hope
be
so.
really good.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your support for this
Yes, I'm
discussion.
happy to support you, and I am despite being retired, I am in contact with a few students now and then, some of my PhD students as well.
Maybe
So,
we can set up a webinar to the university back in Indonesia or government in Indonesia with you sometimes.
yes, that might be. Yes, I think we can probably manage that too.
Yeah. All right, Kathleen.
Good luck with your studies, and you'll be getting a flood of emails from me over the next week.
I hope that you give me a lot of email. Thank you for your time. I hope you get well soon, and I hope you get well all the time. I hope that I can talk to you in person. I don't really basically I'm not really fond of zooming. I never did zoom with my supervisor.
No.
So yeah, I really plan to visit Canterbury and talk to you, and yeah, just have a lot of discussions about this early intervention or any other
because my husband and I were just talking about a trip to Wellington later this year. So
okay, just contact me.
Yeah,
just contact me.
I'll have to tell you, it's even colder in Christchurch than it is in Wellington.
Really, I thought here is colder. I used to live in Melbourne, and I can survive Melbourne. But here in Wellington, in my home, I have to wear this. I have to wear this. I have to wear double jacket and inner suits. And colder in Canterbury. All right.
Yes, but
okay.
Less wind. But a lot of my students spent time in the library because it was warmer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes. My office is also warmer, like compared to the home. So yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, it was nice meeting you, and I'll look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye now. See you when I see you.